for World Watchers International with Mae Brussell, who for over 17 years has investigated and exposed political conspiracies worldwide. World Watchers International originates at KLRB, Carmel, California. Here's Mae.
Good evening. This is Mae Brussell in Carmel, California, and it's tape number 541, April the 18th, 1982. For the most part this evening, I'm going to discuss the Falkland Islands, Antarctica, the conflicts going on there, a continuation of what I started last week. But there's some very important stories in the news, and I'm just going to run them down very quickly, the top 10 stories or so that I will be getting back to later, but I want to mention them now. I want to update information on the murder or the death of Otto von Bolschwing, the Nazi war criminal who's in the United States. I also want to discuss the demise of Louis Kissinger, the father of Henry Kissinger. Also, I want to update the firing of the U.S. Attorney William Kennedy in San Diego. I did a program on that, and he was trying to expose a $30 million, not an $8 million car swindle involving the CIA and Mexican government officials, and he was fired by William French Smith and Ronald Reagan for doing that, trying to save our expenses of car insurance rates in California or in the United States. He was fired for opening up this scandal and trying to prosecute it. There's going to be a hearing on Sirhan's case this next week. He was charged with murdering Senator Robert Kennedy. The chief witness against him is a Lawrence Wilson who's been caught with the help of the California prison system of forging letters on his own behalf to get him out of prison in exchange for lying about Sirhan. So the master forger, Lawrence Wilson, will be the main witness against Sirhan, and that is a large political scandal that I want to go into detail about. Also, the Wall Street Journal, April the 1st, 1982, has a story, front page story on General Electric versus United Technology, a $54 to $650 million contract that may give more inkling into the reason that Ronald Reagan was shot last March and the motives behind General Electric versus United Technology in making the motors and engines for the space stations. It's a very expensive war, and when you get to $650 million, a old-time B-actor is certainly expendable. Mr. Hinckley, John Hinckley, has a trial coming up in the next week or two. This week he's claiming he was aiming for the car, not for the persons that he hit. Also in New Jersey, a Democrat of Senator Williams, was replaced because of the Abscam scandal, and the Abscam involved using a phony front in Chase Manhattan Bank for alleged Arabs and to get Senator Williams out of office. This week, he was replaced by appointment by a Republican, which I think is scandalous. It seems to me the governor should replace a Democrat with a Democrat in the state of New Jersey if a Democrat was elected to the Senate. And furthermore, the gentleman who's been selected to replace Senator Williams is a schoolmate of George Bush's from Yale, a multi-millionaire, which doesn't really matter, 50 million or so, or 100 million in his bank deposit. But he's a trustee of Rockefeller University and works directly with Chase Manhattan, the Rockefellers, and it was the Chase Manhattan Bank that got Williams out. So there's a definite conflict of interest, and there's an appointment of a Republican for a Democrat, so the Senate gets stacked with a hand-picked person via the conduit of the old CIA front, Chase Manhattan. James Buderas, who was one of the 12 or more victims that was hurt by the Abscam, business-wise, to the tune of many dollars. He's suing Chase Manhattan for $30 million. Was at my house last week, and I'll do more on the Abscam and update the scandal. And we had a nice visit, and we've been talking. But the replacement of a person from the Rockefeller Institute, the foundation there, when Chase was used to get the senator out and then putting in a Republican is outrageous, and I think we should be writing to Congress and asking how is it that a Democrat isn't replaced with a Democrat. I want to update the arrest of Andrew Topping in New York City this week. I wrote about him in The Realist in 1973. He was rearrested. He belongs to the CIA and was supposed to kill Richard Nixon, but it was stopped in 1973 because the money would go back to the same people that wanted to kill Nixon in San Diego, the Bernard Barker banks. He said he worked for the CIA. He's been rearrested now in New York City, and I want to talk about that. And also the scandal of the Pan American Airlines trying to get from Braniff the entire monopoly for the South American flights, particularly at a time now where we may be on the verge of World War III with South America. And a very fine world watcher called up and reminded me of the book The Children of Jonestown on page 156, where Pan American was used as the airline to take batches of children down to Guyana, 20, 30, or 40 children at a time, who were drugged with their hands tied behind their back, who were delivered to Jim Jones down in Guyana. And I said very early, as soon as that tragedy took place, that they were batch consignments to be used for experimentations and other matters that United Technology or GE would be building the engines for later. So this book goes into the fact that Pan Am transported these children down there through the public airlines. They were drugged and handcuffed, their hands tied behind their back, and removed down to Guyana in that matter through Pan Am. And Pan Am wants total control of the routes to South America. And if you don't think that you can be on those planes someday drugged and tied, forget it. If you don't speak up for those children now, when your turn comes, you can take the same airline, because they want every city except Venezuela exclusive, all South America. And then I want to update the killing of the witness to the diamond scam, the informer in New York City, and the 3 CBS employees that were murdered at the same time. And also an update on Klaus von Bülow, who's out free on bail, the fellow that was charged with putting his wife in a coma and trying to kill her. He was convicted. He's very active in the art circles, the international art circles in New York. He was involved with the Profuma affair in London, the scandal. He put up the bail for a Mr. Ward, who was then murdered, and he also allegedly was a page at the wedding of Hermann Goering. So I'll get to some of those stories and about 200 other top stories, including the arrest of a man in New York City who works with Wilson and Turpel and Corcola, who's now on $1 million bond, and they haven't listed his crime. He came into New York to do an assassination job, and that's being hushed up to Mr. Arthur. That's being hushed up. It's a big story. There's a lot of big stories, but I'm going to get on to the Falkland Island, Antarctica now, part 2 of that series, because there's a lot of material, more than for one evening, but I'll do as much as I can. One more item before I get into that. I purposely, last week, referred to a book by Ladislas Farago and an operation called Operation Canned Meat that was excuse of starting World War II in 1939, that Hitler used agent provocateurs, because when we get into war, it's going to become from one of the flimsiest excuses, and you won't really know that it's been building up for 20 or 30, 40 years, identical to the way World War II started. And that same Sunday, just last Sunday, Easter Sunday, is when the mosque was blown up and the Israelis were put to shame, and the headlines were reading, new riots erupt in the wave of mosque shootings. Mosque gunman kills 2 at the Muslim site in Israel. Muslims stage global strike this week over the raid. Jewish gunman storms the mosque. Tension grows. Saudi rulers urge protest against the mosque attack. And all week the headlines were the strife and the trouble over in Israel over the attack on Easter Sunday at the holy place of the mosque. Well, who was that Allan Goodman who did the shooting? He's an agent provocateur put there by the United States intelligence, exactly as the Germans did, dressing Germans as Poles to make a provocation for the Second War in 1939. Allan Goodman, the first story said he was 30, and then later they said he was 38, which makes a difference. He's from Tenafly, New Jersey, and there are many tentacles to George Corcola and the entire assassination teams, the Alpha 66, the Omega 7, being trained out of New Jersey. He studied in Jerusalem for 6 years and was gone 2 of the 6. He was there 6 years. He apparently, in quotes, was in Israeli Army Reserve uniform. He was wearing the Israeli uniform, but they weren't sure if he was in the reserve, shooting the U.S.-made M16. They described him as a mentally ill man shouting, "Justice for national liberation." He came from Baltimore. He was over in Baltimore for a while, for a 2-year period or a little more, before he went back to Israel. And when he went back there, they didn't know where he was. From the time he was in Maryland, where he easily could be working with the CIA and the mind control programs there at Fort Derrick. He was in Baltimore, Maryland area, and then shows up in Israel to do Israelis the disfavor of shooting down a mosque as a provocateur to instigate more trouble over in the Middle East. The first TV coverage, or one of them, on ABC News, April the 12th, it was 7 p.m. our time, said he was linked to the CIA. There were 2 reports that this gunman was linked to the CIA, but that was only one radio broadcast. It didn't come out in any of the newspapers I had during the week. And then, of course, the Associated Press began to cover stories in the news media that made him sound like James Earl Bray or Sirhan or Arthur Bremer, Mark David Chapman, John Hinckley, and all these assassins. They described him, first of all, as a haunted life of a suspect. He comes from New Jersey, goes to Israel, back to Maryland, and back to Israel. They don't know where he is, the haunted life. First, they said he tried to learn Hebrew. He couldn't articulate it. He couldn't master it. He probably hated it and doesn't give a damn about Israel or anything else except to make Israel bad in the light of the world on Easter Sunday. The article said little is known about his background. You better believe there's little. They said he appeared to be haunted. In March of 1978, there was a massacre in Israel, so he left in 1978, and he returns in 1981. That's a nice, healthy span of 3 years. He stood out. According to the reports, he didn't have a single friend. Here's our loner, our Lee Harvey Oswald, our Bremer, Sirhan, and so forth. He stood out. He was lonely. He had bottled rage. He always was clenching his fists. He drifted from kibbutz to kibbutz. That was Sirhan, the wanderer, and all these people like Chapman drifting from continent to continent in Europe, and the various alleged assassins or the assassin front guys who are under total mind control of provocateurs. Went to Maryland, as I said, in 78, came back in 81. His activities from March 78, March 81 till he shot down in March of 82 are unknown. They didn't have any record. And then he left the telltale diary. There's always the diary on his desk. In his room was literature of the Jewish Defense League and Meyer Kahane. He calls himself a rabbi. And in comes this man who's been a front for the intelligence operations, an agent provocateur of the Jewish Defense League, and he says that he would be glad to pay for the defense of this wonderful, courageous man. The Menachem Begin is going along with the story that the fellow's mentally sick. If the Mossad, the great Israeli intelligence, couldn't figure out where he was in Maryland or in New Jersey, or where he was wandering from kibbutz to kibbutz, they're just handing him a gun. Begin consistently is the Nazi that I think he is, and they allow these things to happen. They know the pattern, and they work with the assassination teams throughout the whole Middle East and in South Africa, Taiwan, and Argentina. And I never did trust Begin, and again, in this case, he will pass this thing off and not apologize for being a victim, or Israel being a victim of a provocateur from the United States, but go along and just say, well, the fellow has a little mental problem, a little toothache that day. So that's the way the war starts. Senator Goldwater was on 60 Minutes tonight, and he was saying, just right open the World War III would start in the Middle East. It looks like it'll start in Antarctica, but some way with a push and shove, it will start in the Middle East because the scriptures have been quoted over and over and singled out by Christian fundamentalists and other organizations that the Armageddon, the end of the world, the strife will begin. Started over there maybe by Begin. I doubt he's Jewish. Kissinger, I doubt he's Jewish. The combine to blame the Jews for World War III and capture that little enclave of a few Jews around a lot of nasty spies and provocateurs. So it's perfectly natural that this guy goes over there, is able to wear the Israeli uniform and so forth, and create a situation which certainly the Jews don't need in any shape or form. And if they had any intelligence at all, they'd check out this Goodman and demand what the links are to the CIA that sets up a situation, because the CIA doesn't get the headlines, is the Israeli government, the Israeli people get it, and they're the ones to suffer. Now, last week on this program, I talked about the confrontation down at the Falkland Islands. I referred to books on the UFO, the Nazi secret weapons, the activity down there, and the lining up of Alexander Haig, in particular, where his loyalties are and where they're not, and the role of the United States down in the Falklands. And I claim that the real story has less to do with the Falklands than it has to do with Antarctica. And if you don't have that broadcast, you can get the tape of 540 just last week. Monday, when I left the tape off at the tape center to be duplicated and printed up the sheets that go with it, I stopped at the printers and was reading my newspaper while the copies were being made, and there was the Monterey Herald, the morning paper, with Jack Anderson's article, Threat to Antarctica, and he was saying, in effect, to paraphrase some of the sentences or give them the quotes, he says, the Argentine invasion of the Falkland Islands may be a warm-up for future assault on Antarctica, but next time the U.S. toes may be tramped on. And he goes on to secret CIA documents that point to conditions for the aggression down there, and he leaves some of the important ones out, but he lists a few. And the CIA papers about the oil, the Argentine desire to have bases down there and to take the Falklands, and the controversy with the British and the CIA and the Argentine destroyers at one time sought to halt the British research vessels, but they didn't succeed, and Britain held on to the Falklands for a long time, and I'll go into a little history of that. He says there have been similar tensions over the Antarctic. The CIA has documents calling overlapping claims of the United Kingdom, Argentina, and Chile on the Antarctic Peninsula. And this is about the conflicts going down there, that what they really want and what will bring the United States in is Antarctica and not the Falklands. And then Jack Anderson writes, my associate, Dale Van Atta, who recently visited Antarctica, found the Argentine has been forceful in pressing its territorial claims. Now, isn't it interesting that he's down there? Because, see, the average person thinks that Antarctica is just a lot of ice with a lot of penguins and nothing else going on, and all you have to do is get your National Geographic maps going way back for 20, 30 years, and you realize there's a lot of building, construction, and locations and places there that are more than fascinating to study. And I mentioned last week the expedition of Admiral Byrd that was a top secret visit. And on the map of Antarctica, the National Geographic one, there's an area that says the most surprising discovery of Byrd's operation, called High Jump in 1947, was a so-called oasis here. Ice-free blue and green lakes, really inner arms of the sea, were scattered among 300 square miles of bare brown hills. Brown hills, ice-free areas, green lakes, Admiral Byrd, 1947. Those were the areas that are top secret, that we're not allowed to see, that are locked up or destroyed. And those are the areas Admiral Byrd was talking about in the Chilean press on his way home. And then the documents were locked up. You haven't seen much in the last years at all, even though these maps have been public for a long time. Nobody seemed to take note. Well, Jack Anderson was writing about Antarctica, and also the New York Times had an article on Antarctica and Argentina April the 9th, but I didn't get that out here in California for a few days later. The article is called Argentina Covets the Antarctic Too. And it's from Princeton, New Jersey. Argentina's invasion of the Falkland Islands is part of a larger expansion aimed at Antarctic with its unexploited riches. Argentina, Chile, and Great Britain claim the same territory in the peninsula below South America, and this article goes into the importance of that area and how it may draw the United States into it. And the person who wrote this article has written books on Antarctica, Charles Nieder, and he tells you how strange it is to get down there and how Argentina already claims it. He said, I had personal experience that I believed was an Argentine attempt to circumvent any treaty. When I went down there, I sailed from the Peninsula sector in 1977 for Tierra del Fuego, that's in Antarctica. I had to be photographed and fingerprinted for a certificate of entry into Argentina, even though I carried a United States passport. Now, this area is so top secret that Argentine people have been making sure you have to have special papers, special passports. You can't just go down into that area. It's the most top secret area in the entire world, including any military installation there's ever been. And you have to write and get permission. You have to give your whole background, everything about you. And then you're photographed and fingerprinted. And this fellow that was down there, they threatened to leave him there down for the winter if he didn't cooperate with them. And he tells how hard it is. And when you go to Argentina, the use of the passports, stamping the passports, and getting down to Antarctica and back, that Argentina controls the access to that area, which I think is very interesting. He says it is important to the health of the treaty that British-Argentine confrontation be peacefully resolved. If it is not, in this area, the use of violence may well spread from the Falklands to Antarctic, especially to the peninsula sector, where irreparable damage to that treaty, which is dedicated to the non-use of force. Given the sad history of mankind's unilateral, savage treatment of commons, the American Indians and the West, the Amazon, African plains, the consequence of unregulated international exploitation of this white continent and its surrounding sea are depressing to contemplate. Now that's telling you, given our ability and sad history of what we've done to mankind all along, and remember Adolf Hitler patterned his genocidal treaty of rounding up people to the way we rounded up the American Indians, and we've been very successful in South America and Africa, particularly South America, as well as in North America. So he is telling how hard it is to get down there and how Argentina really controls it right now. Another interesting article was from the San Jose Mercury last Sunday. A sinister scenario unfolds in the Falklands. We are witnessing the frightening reality of Argentine domestic politics played on the international stage, and no one was prepared for the opening act of this drama. And it tells about Jacobo Timmerman coming from Argentina and writing a book about what's going on in Argentina and his experience. And he says Timmerman, in unequivocal terms, was connecting modern Argentina with Nazi Germany. The military government that took power in Argentina in March 76 arrived with an all-embracing arsenal of Nazi ideology as a part of its structure. There were differences, however, that Timmerman's torturers told him. Hitler lost the war, and we will win. And a war it was. The rationale behind this is that Argentina has based its theory that World War III has begun. Now, this is written by an expert on Latin American Argentina, and that Argentina was the initial battleground chosen by the enemy, left-wing terrorism, and they have begun their World War III. The Argentine military went on its grim task and wondered why other Western nations didn't see fit to join it, and then the United States did join it. And this article says Argentina makes her debut as a future world power, a sinister scenario. And it goes into the government down there and their intent to finish now what wasn't finished in 1945, in May the 7th, 1945, when the treaty was signed. Now, last week I was talking about space stations down there and activity down in that area that has not been in the public eye very much yet, but it will. And I want to read just a couple of pages from a book called Messengers of Deception by Jacques Vallée. Vallée wrote this book in 1979 about spaceships. And Vallée is somebody who incidentally was written up in the San Francisco Chronicle just this week, April the 12th, last Monday. He has a corporation called Infomedia Corporation making computers. And in case you think he's a fluke, and he is not, he just made Infomedia computers for 30 companies, including Bechtel Corporation, Phillips Petroleum, City Services, National Aeronautic and Space, that's NASA. And he gives an example how Bechtel has walking computers. Bechtel uses his notepad computer to keep track of a 1.5 billion gold and copper mining project in New Guinea. In fact, the porters working there carry these computers terminals on their heads to the project sites at Mount Fulaban in New Guinea. This notepad computer keeps track of supplies, ships, weather, information, progress. You have instant contact with 26 to 30 people. Jacques Vallée got a $400,000 grant and made these computers that 30 major corporations are using. So that he's from the Sorbonne, he's a computer scientist. He's also a space researcher. So that's the background on the man whose book I'm going to quote now. It doesn't come out of paperbacks on UFOs, is Jacques Vallée working for these corporations. He wrote in 1979, "Let me summarize my conclusions about the UFOs," he says in the introduction, beginning of his book. The UFOs are real. They are an application of psychotronic technology. They are physical devices used to affect human consciousness. And the reason I'm reading this, for those of you that didn't hear the program last week, is that there is a lot of literature and a lot of hard evidence that the UFOs are man-made, and they're made down in Antarctica by the Nazis as weapons out of Argentina and into Antarctica, and with the United States technology also, in collusion with the United States Air Force and NASA and Nazi scientists. And that's why this area is so important. He says they may not be from outer space. They may, in fact, be terrestrial-based manipulating devices. Their purpose may be to achieve social changes on the planet. Their methods are those of deception, systematic manipulation of witnesses and contactees, covert use of various sects and cults, control of channels through which the alleged space messages can make an impact on the public. He says the UFO researchers must realize that this involves, he says, politics. The UFOs will make an impact on our social reality. They are part of our political reality. They will show, his book, he says, will show the brutal consequences of the models, the way the UFOs are used, the apprehension that will give people, leading to the mutilation of animals that are taking place throughout the western states, are part of this psychological manipulation. He said, a friend who read this book in manuscript told me not to publish it. That's not what America wants to hear, he said. America wants the UFO to fly down from heaven like the Close Encounters of the Third Kind, filled with new hopes for mankind. America wants a shiny spacecraft to replace the deflated balloon of its religious values. If UFOs are connected with unexplained mutilation of cattle and with behavior modification on a grand scale, America doesn't want to know about it. Now, he goes into what in England began as the Martian conspiracy. Incidentally, the arrival of the Martians was a sensational success, the Orson Welles show in New Jersey in 1938, the story of the Martians. So the British intelligence used the title of the Martians, and he said in his book it was used by British intelligence during World War II. It had nothing to do with the Red Planet. It's a spy industry created to keep the Allied command informed on the moves and intentions of the Wehrmacht, of the German government. And it goes into the lies that the intelligence system needs, and the subterfuge and the magic to keep people off their guard. And ICS in London was set up by Winston Churchill. It was called the controlling system, the ICS, and it was weaponry by special means of disinformation. And the work of the Martians was to manipulate people, friends and foe alike, and keep them off their guard. Now, the London Control Section, LCS, set up by Winston Churchill to use special means, was run by a Colonel John Bevan. They had members, a Major Morley, Derek Morley, a financier and shipping magnate, a Major Noel Gordon Clark. They used a Professor Neville from another well-known person in British society, and they had links to various people in espionage that went into the Middle East. Colonel Sir Ronald Wingate. Wingate was the son of Wingate Pasha of the Sudan, a cousin of Lawrence Arabia, who was also in British intelligence in the Middle East. Leading businessmen, shipping magnates, millionaire industrialists, large spies were used in the LCS, the London Control System of Winston Churchill, and they used the number XX double cross. But what they were going to do is manufacture and deliver intelligence that was confusing to people. And the beginning of this spy system during World War II then was transferred over to the disinformation department of the UFOs and the flying saucers, while the Nazis continued to build those weapons down in Argentina or in South America. If they are man-made, that's where they're coming from. Jacques Vallée had 6 consequences, social consequences, of this kind of disinformation operation, and I'll just read one of these to you, or two. He said, the belief in UFO would widen the gap between public and scientific institutions. Someday our society will pay the price for the lack of scientific attention given to the UFO phenomena that we should have had, that the scientific will fight the other person who wants it to be spiritual and break them in two where they should have applied the scientific principles and studied it right away. And then he says another motive is the irrational motivations of people based on faith are spreading hand in hand. As things go bad, we want to believe in something. It has no scientific basis that it's coming from another planet or another place, and we'll hold on to it, and it will split us apart on what we believe in. I know this is true because I'll do a lot of research on one subject, such as the Kennedy assassination, and then other researchers will say, well, stick to Kennedy and don't get to UFOs because they're impossible and that's off the wall. And it divides you from studying them simultaneously with each other and then coming to the same conclusions or differing based on actual evidence. And that is one of the purposes, to divide opinion and break people up while the activity was going on. I'll take a 1-minute break and get back to the Falklands and the Argentine crisis.
Concludes the first half of World Watchers International with Mae Brussell. We will return with the second half after a brief pause.
In just about every country.
Incidentally, regarding the position of the United States in this crisis of Great Britain versus Argentina, on the NBC News this week on Thursday night, there was a request of the British for the European allies to have an embargo of trade against Argentina, which they agreed to do. But the United States said they couldn't do that embargo because on that day or the next day, which would have been this past Friday, they were shipping $40 million worth of chemicals down to Argentina. Now, that is an outrageous amount of chemicals, enough to kill everyone in this world if you wanted to analyze what the potentials are in the chemicals that we're shipping down to Argentina. If you read the news this week, the entire state of Michigan is contaminated with some chemicals in the feed of cattle. That PCB, we don't know the consequences for years, and all you have to do is ship that kind of poison into the 49 other states and have a whole generation that is weakened or possibly has cancer later on in their food and in their produce and in their animals, if they eat animals, that kind of pollution. So $40 million of chemicals went down to Argentina by the United States government the very time that the other allies were having an embargo. This is supposed to be the Operation Zero week, where we talk about atomic bombs and the danger of nuclear explosions and doomsday. And the nuclear people have never liked me particularly. They don't like the broad range of subjects I go into. They want to stop atomic bombs or the testing of bombs. And I don't believe in a single problem, a solution to what's going on in the world. You can stop testing atomic bombs. You can stop making them. We have enough to blow the world up now. But what are you going to do with the chemicals? $40 million chemicals to a country that tells Mr. Timmerman, this time we're going to win World War III, and we're sending them chemicals. Think about that one. Those are the things that we should be stopping because they're even as dangerous and insidious. They're not quite as visible as having your flesh fall off. But we're sending them down to Argentina at this time. Well, Alexander Haig is seen on the evening news playing his tennis this Sunday. He couldn't miss his tennis game. He should get his ass home. An outrageous traitor is down there having a ball with people that have sworn that they'll win World War III this time. Torturers, murderers, and hardly one being impartial. It's hanging down there for the few extra days, which he didn't have to do. Now, getting back to the Falkland Islands and a little bit of history, for those of you who have the book, The Crime and Punishment of I.G. Farben, the large chemical compound that has been written up as being the network for, again, the supremacy, the end of World War III, finalizing World War II, and controlling us through corporations and chemicals. During World War I, the chemical compound in Germany needed gunpowder. They needed salt. They had to go to Chile for saltpeter. They had to get synthetic ammonia in order to make gunpowder, and they had to scale the world and find out where to go it. They had to convert the ammonia into nitric acid. This is the book on I.G. Farben. The munitions industry needed nitric acid, and they looked around for various areas where they could get it from, particularly from Chile. And then there was a shortage in nitric acid during World War I. And all of a sudden, the German Admiralty, according to this book, devised a bold and imaginative plan worthy of the stakes involved. The goal was to capture the British-owned Falkland Islands. This was during World War I, an unfortified coaling and supply base for British naval vessels at the tip of South America. These islands were the southernmost hinge of the British blockade, standing guard over trade routes from the west coast of South America to Europe. Their mission was to capture the Falkland Islands, and they embarked on what they called the Battle of Nitrogen by going down to Chile and South America and getting the nitrogen they needed for their gunpowder. The British Admiralty learned of the presence of these ships off of Chile and the German commander, and they sent down ships and stopped this grabbing of the Falkland Islands at the time. They were able to put the Germans off of grabbing the Falklands, which was important, the harbor there, and for shipping and so forth. And it goes into the fact that Winston Churchill, in his book after the war, The World Crisis, doesn't mention the Falkland Islands, and they said he apparently didn't know its importance. But Winston Churchill was very much a part of an area that I'll go into at a later time when the war was over, when he said we fought the wrong person, when he helped the Nazis, he realized he should have fought the Soviet Union, and I don't believe that Winston Churchill knew that the Falklands wasn't important. I think he left it out of his book because at the end of World War II, the Falklands and Antarctica were already built up and were getting built up, particularly the Antarctica area. So that the Germans had to turn back, and the German dye-stuff industry had to go other places. They were looking for bromine, chlorine, and so forth down in that area. But Falkland was important there for the war materials in World War I, so you know that it's important right now, and it's been an area that we haven't been taught about in our schools in geography, but other people have watched it very carefully. Now, a year ago in 1981, last June, I was doing a series of broadcasts on the links of our government to the fascist regime in Antarctica from Italy, not to Antarctica, Argentina. And I did several programs on the P2 scandal, the Italian politics, the links of our State Department, Ronald Reagan, Alexander Haig, to Argentina, to the Nazis down there. And I cited the February 1981 attempt to kill the King and Queen of Spain, and to put the links of Nazis to Argentina, those connections I had on that particular broadcast, June 7th, 1981. And then I had a reminder in February 1981 of the role of Ronald Reagan and Alexander Haig in the plans to put the Nazi fascists back on the throne of Spain, and that is their direct link of financing and building up Argentina after World War II. The P2 scandal, the Italian scandal where the government changed hands in May of 1981, made Licio Gelli flee to Argentina. And he's very important to Argentina. He took about $22 billion out of Italy and went down to Argentina. And June the 14th, 1981, I did a broadcast, The Courtship of Argentina. It was from the New York Times, why Ronald Reagan, William Buckley, James Buckley, family are thick with Brazil, Argentina, and want the United States to share our Navy with the Argentine Navy. Now, we knew that Great Britain was having trouble in the Falklands with Argentina, but the Reagan administration was gung-ho to let them use our Navy and our experience down there. And I cited Licio Gelli with his important mafia drug connections, blackmailing the United States, that he was at the inauguration of Ronald Reagan. He was one of the dignitaries and people that donated to the Ronald Reagan administration and the allegiance of Reagan to these people down there in Argentina. There's been a strong tie of the entire administration to that group down there, and there's no way that they can stay disinterested. They've been loyal to that gang from Italy, the fascism, to Spain, to Argentina all along. And I cited the role that Frank Sinatra had in a large contract where they fell to build a multi-million-dollar investment in New York City, a Harry Helmsley, and the money comes out of the Marcy Group of Argentina, a $1 billion investment with a $100 million studio in the west side of New York City, Sinatra being the key man. Sinatra, working with the Argentine junta, was at Ronald Reagan's inauguration and now gets to use the front porch to share the White House. He said last time when he was there with the former president of Italy was there last week, he didn't want to use the back door that's for dignitaries anymore. Sinatra uses the front door. Licia Gelli, dual citizenship between Argentina and Italy, was at Reagan's inauguration. Richard Allen has close ties to Licia Gelli along with Alexander Haig and the NATO operations, and Michael Sindona, who also donated to the Ronald Reagan, Richard Nixon Republican Party. There's an intense loyalty between this group and the Argentine fascism, and I don't think that England really stands a chance. I think they'll be betrayed if they can. And as I say, the symbol of Jeane Kirkpatrick of the UN having dinner at the Argentine embassy with Walter Stessel, the deputy of the State Department under Alexander Haig, the night that they went into Falklands and took over, is symbolic of what the United States is going to do and intends to do visually and in every other way. There was an article this week in the paper, U.S. reportedly giving both sides intelligence. Can you imagine such a thing? The United States is providing intelligence to both Argentina and Britain. There's been passing off of information to both sides, and it goes into the fact that the United States is providing through our satellites to Great Britain what is going on, and at the same time, the officials confirmed the sharing of U.S. intelligence with Argentina, some information gathered by reconnaissance satellites. This is the most treacherous behavior, I think, that makes Mr. Chamberlain look heroic just before World War II broke out, going to Germany and back to London, trying to appease when the war is about to break out. I think this is the most scandalous behavior, and everything that Ronald Reagan's done from the time he was in office leans right to the Argentine junta, which many articles have said he wants the Argentinians to come in and wipe out Central America, all those countries, and put them into a slave fascist state, and Congress won't let him do it. So he's depending upon the Argentine soldiers to wipe out Central America and have a total fascism through South and Central America. And meanwhile, they can deposit back in some form the $40 million worth of chemicals that we shipped out from United States this week. Betty Beal, the Society column in the Monterey Herald, she's also in the Washington Post. Ladies' luncheon feat, rich Argentine lady. And this is just this past week. The day Argentina invaded the Falkland Islands, the richest woman in Argentina, if not all Latin America, was the guest of a small luncheon given by Assistant Secretary of State Tom Ender's wife, Gaetana, Gaetana. And you may have seen Mr. Enders on the television during the time of the El Salvador crisis, which isn't over, and giving his opinion on what was going on down there. I'll have to get out the articles on Enders to just refresh my memory about how bad he was at the time. Now, Gaetana Enders is an Italian-born woman, and as I say, the P2 scandal with Licia Gelli, the dual citizenship between Italy and Argentina, is very interesting. And when that story first broke in 1981, the newspaper said that international operation of fascism, the real hard fascism in Licia Gelli, to put a police state in Spain and Italy simultaneously last year, it was conducted and directed from the United States. Well, the day that the Falklands was invaded, that same evening, Walter Stessel and Jeane Kirkpatrick were at the Argentine embassy, the dinner in New York City with the Argentinians, UN people. In Washington, D.C., was a luncheon, and I don't think this happened to be a coincidence. This woman, Amalia, better known as Amalita, Fortabat, Fortabat, is an industrialist from Buenos Aires. She just bought last year a $6.4 million Turner painting in London for her home in Argentina, $6.4 million that William French Smith, he said he tried to buy for the Huntington Art Gallery. And she's entertained in Washington by Mrs. Enders. She's the biggest cement factory owner in Argentina. Her husband died a few years ago. So Mrs. Enders and her friend from Argentina are having a luncheon with other wives of Washington, D.C., and it's very hard. not to see the richest woman of Argentina, who is buying this art from London and elsewhere around the world, wine and dine in Washington the day that the Falklands is invaded. An article this last week in the San Jose Mercury, and I brought in a lot of articles to share, the U.S. may be the biggest loser in the Falkland, by Anthony Lewis. And it brings out the point. On Friday evening, April the 2nd, the Argentine embassy in Washington, it was in Washington, not in New York, arranged a dinner in honor of Jeane Kirkpatrick, and Deputy Secretary of State Walter J. Stessel was sitting there with her the day that the Falklands was invaded. He said from almost the day he took office, Ronald Reagan has fawned on the military tyrants who rule Argentina. And it says, in February 81, a new American delegation to the UN Commission on Human Rights tried to soften the work on the disappearances of people. That's the outright murder of 20, 30, 40,000 people. They prepared a speech saying, we recognize in Argentina one of the world's advanced civilizations, a religious culture. This is a quotation from our great president. In March, General Robert Viola, then Argentina's president-designate, came to Washington, D.C. and got a warm welcome. And later, Mrs. Kirkpatrick went to Buenos Aires, where she said the United States was going to improve military relationships with Argentina. In May, Secretary of State Alexander Haig told a congressional committee that he wanted to resume sending millions and millions of military aid to Argentina because that country and ours shared values. When asked what values, he said, we resist communism and we believe in God. And Anthony Lewis said, America will be the loser of the Falklands. He said, the Argentine rulers are cold-blooded opportunists. They harbor among them murderers, plain fascists, people who openly display swastikas, and in cells they torture Jews and other people, and so forth. And he says that these generals are laughing at us. The generals in Argentina are laughing at the United States. They are genuine totalitarians who think the outcome of World War II was a great mistake. And it goes on to the role that they're going to continue now. Some of my older articles on Argentina and the relationship to Antarctica, I have one from the Washington Post, September the 17th, 1979. And it shows where the Glomar Explorer, remember the Glomar? That was the multi-billion-dollar ship that you and I paid for out of our taxes for the CIA. Then the Glomar Explorer goes down to Antarctica. This is, as I said, Washington Post, 1979, and realizes that there's $45 billion worth of gallons of oil down in Antarctica. And the Glomar is working for the Texas Geophysical Company of Houston, trying to grab up the minerals, the first step for mineral research down there, okay? 3 oil companies are representative of the State Department's Antarctic Advisory Committee: Atlantic Richfield, Exxon, and Gulf. Now, Exxon is Alexander Haig, Henry Kissinger, and Chase Manhattan. If anybody doesn't know, that's the David Rockefeller Combine, exploiting the oil possibilities down there. And Gulf Oil is Richard Mellon Scaife, who totally runs the cabinet that was selected by Ronald Reagan and has been so influential with Richard Vogare, with kicking out congressmen that were anything but right of Genghis Khan. Richard Mellon Scaife is the very, very wealthy Gulf Oil character who's buying up newspapers in California, who controls so much of the media of Georgetown University, of appointments of people like Mr. Watts, Jeane Kirkpatrick, the polluters of the world. Now, this article, 1979, tells how the Glomar Explorer, built by us with the CIA under the Howard Hughes cover, goes down to look at 45 million barrels of oil. And they used that ship, and they drilled 4 holes in the Ross Sea to get an idea of what was going on. So the Glomar, remember the first story of the Glomar was that they dug up a Russian ship and gave a prayer for some dead Russians and then threw them back in the water. Many years ago, I did programs on the Glomar Explorer around 1972, 73. It was nothing but a ship built with our taxes to explore the areas of the world that are for the purposes of a handful of corporations. And like the famous lines in that movie Network that Padachevsky wrote, there are no countries or boundaries, there's just corporations like Exxon and Dow Chemical. That article is from 1979 in the Washington Post. Another article, the San Francisco Chronicle, December the 8th, 1979, Antarctica's wealth. For more than 20 years, the United States has been carrying on these scientific programs. In this article goes into the geophysical exploration of the Glomar Explorer again and the huge hunk of oil, $55 million. The United States is paying a year in Antarctica on these programs. $55 million a year you've been sending down to Antarctica. I told you last week how much money has been flowing down there constantly, but did you realize $55 million a year has been going down in that area? And we're supposed to believe that this little Falkland confrontation and the lineup of this cast of characters, the real bastards of the world, has to do with 1,200 people and sheep on a windy island. December the 8th, 1979, this came from the San Francisco Chronicle, $55 million a year going down to Antarctica. Another story I have, some going back to 1979, 1980, the United States assures a role in the future of Antarctica, and this tells about, at the present time, there were 800 people living down in Antarctica. This is in 1979 that they admitted. 255 Soviets, 154 Argentinians, 114 Americans, and 2,400 summer residents living down in Antarctica. And as I said before, if you look at the maps, there's warm water bases, brown hills, and a lot of things that you may not have even dreamt that were going on, but have been written up in the literature if you want to see it. Another article in the New York Times this past a week, it was in July, Argentine and Soviet are no longer just business partners. Now, this has to do with the Soviet Union being angry at us at always talking about their human rights and trying to get into what they do in their jails, and the Soviet Union lining up with Argentina and telling us to butt off about human rights, that they're going to trade wheat, they're going to trade meat, the Soviet Union will send them weapons, that they're both sick and tired of our holier-than-thou attitude. This article is by Edward Schumacher. It said the Soviet market is Argentina's principal outlet for the export of grain and beef, and the Russians are sending hydroelectric and nuclear energy programs. The two countries often ally with each other in international organizations, and they perceive the United States as interfering in their human rights policies, and they don't like it. The growing Soviet-Argentine ties seem startling. Argentina is headed by a junta with bloody suppression of the left, and it goes into the philosophy of not allowing Marxist papers and newspapers or movies, but at an economic level, they're trading and getting along fine. And in 1980, the New York Times had an article, the 7th Soviet base is established in Antarctica. That's March 24th, 1980. Another one in 1979, New York Times, algae are found thriving under the lake ice in Antarctica. And one in May 1980, Los Angeles Times, the scramble is on for the Antarctic reserves. Now, there's a little irony in the Antarctic story that I may wind up with. I have one or two more things I might have time for. The base for this operation, the United States base for a lot of this, is down at the Ascension Islands. The Ascension Island has been a place for the Americans for the space program. It's a base for our satellite tracking station. It's the site of major communications relay installations. There's an article about the Ascensions, April the 10th, last week, 1982, New York Times. Americans live there, several hundred. They operate an Air Force base that was built in 1942, which Britain is using. They're bringing in their C-130s and they're stocking up, and that's the base from which they'll fuel and land and use our base at Ascension Island that has been very important for our security down in that area. Now, just 700 miles below Ascension Island is St. Helena Island, and the funny thing is that the Ascension area was used after Napoleon was taken as a prisoner down to St. Helena Island. Many people don't know that or don't remember it, but Napoleon ravaged the world, tried to conquer Russia, lost, you know the story of Waterloo, lost the battle, couldn't take the riches of Russia, the gold, the resources, the minerals, the huge landmass of the forests. They thought it was for grabs, and Napoleon wanted it. And he was held off and he was turned back. And because of his defeat, he was stuck on a little island in St. Helena where he died in 1821, where ever since Napoleon tried to get Russia, the people of Europe have tried hard to conquer that wonderful mass that they just want to get their greedy hands on, long before there was Karl Marx and the Russian Revolution. It has to do with mineral and oils and forests and access to this huge land mass. It has more to do with that. So here we are, almost with the same people trying to accomplish what Napoleon couldn't do. He lost and was stuck on this little island till he died. And just 700 miles from there is the United States trying again to fight the Soviet Union because Napoleon couldn't take Russia. The United States and the Germans and the British, so forth, thought they could take it. And they built up this machinery. They built up the war machine for Adolf Hitler. The Wall Street built him up. The American industrial giants, the British and so forth, built him up so that he would conquer Russia. And then they would all divide the spoils, okay? But it didn't work out that way. Then when the war was over, Churchill said, we fought the wrong people, so they shipped arms and loans. My goodness, the British own like $30 billion Argentina owes Britain. They give them the money, and Argentina gets all the weapons and buys the chemicals and then says we don't have money to pay the debts. What if the 500 banks that loaned billions of dollars to Poland and got nothing for it, gave the money to Poland, and then the Polish sent it down to Argentina to get ready for World War III again? What if all that money just went directly down to the area where we're going to see a lot of dust and fire? And if we don't see it this week or next week, it has to build up, because that is the way the score has been written. It's been written in many history books. It's there for you to see. So the Ascension Islands is where the British will use if they get to the push and shove. The Americans are down there preserving their base and station, and they're only 700 miles from where Napoleon died, and we're willing to die, and the British are willing to die, and the Argentine are willing to die for the same reasons all over again. You see the newsreel, Margaret Thatcher, they're waving her on, let's go to war. You see the newsreels of Argentina, let's go to war. They're all willing to go again for the same reason, and it just seems so silly. But they want that Russia, and they have to have it. Now, there was an article by Mary McGrory, Reagan's response in Argentina must have scalded Margaret Thatcher. And she brings out the point that Ronald Reagan said in the Oval Office press conference, we are friends of both sides, when asked about the aggression, and he repeated friends of both sides. And she brings out how Margaret Thatcher and the British were along with us at the hostage crisis, how they defended Reagan from the sniping when he was criticized with the other NATO allies, and they supported his economic policies and his nuclear strategy. And then she says he comes in and he says, I'm on the side of being neutral. She says he's supporting a fascist tin horn junta that's engaged in flagrant aggression, and how can he be friends of both sides? Argentina's aggression, she writes, is outrageous. And then he goes off to the Barbados to get support for his Caribbean basin and more politics, and I hope to use Argentina for the bloodbath down there. Now, this situation of Alexander Haig lining up with these people, Margaret Thatcher said this week she trusts Haig more than Reagan, but that means you maybe trust Himmler more than Hitler. It's a matter of degree who you trust and who your friends are. One thing has been perfectly obvious ever since Ronald Reagan took oath of office, and I've dated it and put it on the air on these programs week after week, was the alliance of everyone in his administration and with the fascist countries, the attempted coup in Spain, in Italy, in the White House, with Frank Sinatra, the heads of states, the Navy operations down there with Chile and Argentina. We have encouraged them. We are secretly supporting them. We are hiding the real purposes, and our major oil companies have already explored what they want down there. And I noticed that they're not British oil companies down there. You see, they're Exxon, Richfield, and Gulf. I don't even see Queen Juliana's Shell down there, although I'm sure they'd get a piece of the action. I really believe, as some article said last week, that the United States is ready to go it along and write off their allies. And I think this has been the intention for a long, long time, that they don't need Europe. They can even chemically get rid of them. And that, I think, is the biggest danger. I've always said that the chemical war, the spread of chemicals in food, in fertilizer, in the air, in the water, in the waterways, rivers, they could wipe us out because they have the means and technology. And if we're shipping them $40 million worth of chemicals last week, who shipped it? What was it? Who gave the permission? Those are the traitors. Those are the people that are selling this country out, and they should be charged as being traitors. There's so many shenanigans going on, as I say, such as appointing a Republican senator to replace a Democratic senator, a member of the Rockefeller Foundation, when Rockefeller and Chase Manhattan got Senator Williams out. There's so much collusion and chicanery, but the world picture down there is very important. And if you look back over articles and maps over the last 20 years, it's all there. The script is there, but nobody wanted to see it. It's like Jacques Vallée says when he talks about the UFOs being man-made. He says, this isn't what American people want to see and hear. He was told they want to have some dream or fantasy about the way the world is. And the way the world is described in book after book of contracts, deals, explorations, maps. It's all there if you want to see it. And now they're coming to the push and shove. So it'll be interesting to see in the next weeks the next act of this stage play. In the meantime, you take care, and we'll do our homework, and I'll be back with you, I hope, next week. It's Mae Brussell, Carmel, California.
This has been World Watchers International with noted conspiracy investigator Mae Brussell. This program originates from Carmel, California.
KLRB, Carmel by the Sea.